The CCP has interfered in Canada's elections. Germany's chancellor makes a new friend. And Xi Jinping prepares the military for combat readiness. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. This episode is sponsored by PC Doctor Toolbox. Monitor your PC for software crashes, hardware failures, and the kind of glitches that make your life miserable. Before we jump into the latest China news, I just want to acknowledge that the U.S. just held its important midterm elections this week. And whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, China wants you to know you lost. Because according to state-run CGTN, the costly U.S. midterm elections fueled polarization, divisions, and even concerns of political violence. Terrible. I mean, why have elections at all? Things would really be much simpler if one party would just purge all their opposition. But no matter how terrible America's elections are, they're even worse in Canada. A recent investigation by journalist Sam Cooper showed that the Chinese Communist Party interfered in Canada's 2019 election, and the Canadian intelligence had warned Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about it. According to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, which is like Canada's CIA, the CCP's election interference included funneling payments to at least 11 federal candidates, placing agents in the offices of members of parliament to influence policy, trying to corrupt former Canadian officials to gain political leverage, and campaigning to punish Canadian officials who stood up to the CCP. That's pretty damning stuff. Canadian intelligence had actually presented this information to Justin Trudeau and his cabinet as far back as January, including detailed examples of Beijing's efforts to subvert Canada's democratic process. So how did Prime Minister Trudeau respond? He didn't. At least not until this week, after the article was published in Global News. Then Trudeau came out to publicly accuse China of aggressive election interference. Way to get ahead of the issue. Speaking of Chinese aggression, there was a big standoff between the U.S. Coast Guard and illegal Chinese fishing fleets. This actually happened back in August, but it was kept quiet for a long time. Because, you know what they say, democracy thrives in darkness. I think that's how it goes. Anyway, what happened is a heavily armed U.S. Coast Guard cutter sailed up to a fleet of a few hundred Chinese squid fishing boats, not far from Ecuador's Galapagos Islands. Its mission was to inspect the vessels for any signs of illegal, unreported, or unregulated fishing, which it had every right to do, even to board the fishing boats. It's part of an international effort to stop illegal fishing operations from damaging the ecosystem. So the U.S. Coast Guard told them they wanted to do an inspection, and then 3 vessels sped away, one turning aggressively 90 degrees toward the Coast Guard cutter, forcing it to take evasive action to avoid being rammed. The Coast Guard avoided the collision and was eventually able to board 2 of the ships. But this, of course, created an international incident, because the Chinese regime was upset, saying it was the U.S. that acted illegally. And also, China has zero tolerance for illegal fishing activities. We only found out about the incident in November after U.S. personnel told ABC News about it. But they requested anonymity to avoid jeopardizing a multilateral process seeking to force China to sanction the vessels. They think a secretive multilateral process will get the Chinese Communist Party to change its behavior? China may not be afraid of being shunned by the world, or even war, but surely they're terrified of quiet American bureaucracy. Ooh. And after the break, the German chancellor visits Beijing to make a new friend. Welcome back. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz met with Chinese President Xi Jinping last week. Scholz is the first Western leader to visit China since COVID. I get it, I've been locked down for a long time too, and I can't wait to travel again, but China? Really? Scholz has pushed for a close relationship with China despite its recent advances toward dictatorship and widespread opposition within Germany. In fact, there was widespread opposition to his trip even from members of his own political party. The timing is especially bad since it comes right after Xi Jinping just took power for a third term. And intentional or not, the visit seems like a tacit approval of Xi's power grab. But there are people supporting Scholz's visit to Beijing. Like CNN. Their business news analyst says that Germany needs China more than ever. See, China is Germany's largest trading partner, and Germany is hardly in a position to rock the boat with Beijing as it grapples with the challenge of reviving its struggling economy. I mean, working with an authoritarian regime like Russia turned out pretty badly, because Russia started a war and then Germany was forced to take sides, and then Germany lost that cheap energy supply from Russia. So the lesson is, it's a great time to strengthen ties with a different authoritarian regime. But at least Germany is doing one thing right. It looks like Germany will be blocking a Chinese chip deal. That deal would have allowed a Chinese company to take over Elmos. Wait, China wants to take over a Sesame Street character? I mean, I guess he's red, but what's that, Shelley? Oh, wow, it's even worse. Elmos is a German semiconductor plant. The Chinese Communist Party was apparently trying to buy Elmos right after President Biden issued an executive order to cut off microchip supply to China. And that policy has spillover effects on all countries that sell microchips to China. See, China wants to use advanced microchips to do things like rule the world with artificial intelligence and build high-tech weapons it could use to attack Taiwan. Fortunately, the German government seems to understand this too. So they blocked the purchase on national security concerns. At least the German government isn't completely stupid when it comes to giving China their technology. But speaking of being completely stupid when it comes to giving China their technology, NVIDIA. See, Biden's executive order to block microchip sales is only as good as its implementation. And there's a loophole. Specifically, it bans selling China microchips above a specific processing power. After the Commerce Department added NVIDIA's A100 chip to the export control list, NVIDIA was forecast to lose hundreds of millions of dollars. Their solution? NVIDIA is now offering the A800 chip. It's a tiny bit slower, so it slides right under the limit set by the Commerce Department. And really, isn't the whole point of laws just to figure out how to get around them? And after the break, Xi Jinping tells his troops to get ready to fight and win. Welcome back. With Xi Jinping now in his third term as leader of the Chinese Communist Party, he wants everyone to know who's boss. That's why one of his first acts after the 20th Party Congress last month was to take the new Politburo Standing Committee to Yan'an, the site of Mao's bloodiest purge. All party members understand the significance of this. Yan'an was the Communist Party's headquarters for over a decade. Mao used it as a place to build up his political base after the Long March. During World War II, while the nationalist government that was running China was busy fighting off the Japanese, Mao was busy torturing and killing his political enemies at Yan'an. He wanted to make sure the only party members left standing were completely loyal to him. It was called the Yan'an Rectification Movement, a name that strikes terror in the hearts of all communist officials who still have hearts. Scholars believe that at least 30,000 were purged and some 10,000 executed during that movement. That was in the 1940s. Yan'an is now considered a national landmark because of its place in Communist Party history. It's become a hotbed of what's called red tourism. Yes, you too can dress up like a member of Mao's Red Army and stand outside the house where he lived while he killed a bunch of people. It's like Disneyland, but for purges. So because of all the party history here, it makes sense for Xi Jinping to bring his top officials to Yan'an after re-upping his status as leader of the Communist Party. But since it's also the place where Mao purged a bunch of officials he considered disloyal, well, let's just say the subtext of that is not lost on these officials. Speaking of getting ready to kill people, the Chinese military, which, as I've explained in the past, is actually an arm of the Communist Party, not the government. This week, Xi Jinping visited the Central Military Commission Command Center. According to Chinese state-run media, Xi said the entire military should devote all its energy to and carry out all its work for combat readiness, enhance its capability to fight and win, and effectively fulfill its missions and tasks in the new era. Now, Xi Jinping says this pretty much every time he visits the military. I mean, who's going to visit their military and say, "Don't be combat ready, guys. In fact, don't worry about winning wars. You're all winners on the inside. But every time Xi Jinping does this, there's international headlines. This one's from March of 2021. And yet it's like Western leaders don't believe him when he talks about this, because they're responding by doing things like visiting China to enhance trade and allowing companies to sell China microchips that can be used in weapons. I mean, there's always the off chance that the Communist Party won't invade the free and democratic country of Taiwan if we give them lots more money and technology. You gotta have hope. Speaking of the Communist Party preparing for war, more than 5,000 Chinese military staff now live on man-made islands in the South China Sea. We know this because China's state-run CGTN said on Monday that a Chinese ship visited 13 islands of the Paracel and Spratly archipelagos and provided medical services to more than 5,000 people, and it referred to them as officers and soldiers. This is a big deal because it's the first time state media have revealed how many military personnel are stationed on those artificial islands. But they're only disclosing that it's at least 5,000. One U.S. private security company estimated earlier this year that it might be closer to 10,000, which makes sense. There's been an incredible amount of buildup in recent years, with at least 3 islands fully militarized, including long airplane runways, tons of radar towers, and of course, lots of housing for troops. And if after all this you don't believe the Chinese Communist Party is planning to invade Taiwan, I don't know what show you've been watching, but it's not the one you're watching right now. And this episode has been sponsored by PC Doctor Toolbox. There are many reasons your computer crashes, like buggy software, hardware failures, and general slowdowns with older computers. And the worst part is, your computer always seems to crash at the worst time, like when you're about to give a presentation or when you're on the road and there's no IT person around to help. Fortunately, there's PC Doctor Toolbox with remote monitoring. If you're concerned about the health of your computer and want tools to prevent untimely system issues, you should be using PC Doctor Toolbox. Stop crashes before they happen. And we have a special announcement for China Uncensored viewers. Toolbox is now free for personal use on up to 5 PCs with remote monitoring. Use the link below to sign up and download your 5 free copies of Toolbox today. I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching China Uncensored.